Jonathon Shierman is a pastor in Saskatchewan who, like many religious leaders, is struggling with staying connected with their congregations amid this pandemic and all of its health restrictions. And yet he says in a recent Huffington Post article that Christians flouting pandemic rules need a come to Jesus moment. Pastor Jonathon Shierman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So why do you say that churches that have challenged the health restrictions need to have a come to Jesus moment?
Well, because it's pretty evident based on the Bible that we are called as Christians to abide by the things that our earthly leaders are asking of us, unless what they're asking of us contravenes biblical teaching. And so far, I see nothing that's being asked of us that contravenes any of that. So I am calling people back to what Jesus would demand of us.
Some people have been arguing that it does contravene what we've been called to do as the church. What are your thoughts on that?
Obviously, I disagree. So far, they've asked many things that are difficult on us, things that put us in a difficult position or in an inconvenient position. But so far, I haven't seen anything or been asked to do anything that contravenes biblical teaching. It might make my job more difficult. It might make the role of the church less efficient unless we go about things creatively. But so far, no one's asked me to say or do or censored anything that we do as a church in any way other than saying you can't gather in person in large quantities without certain rules or restrictions. And that's just not something that the Bible ever says is required of us. Now, some people would point to Hebrews and say, we're not to give up meeting together. And I fully affirm that, but I would challenge that we are members of the church, both visible and invisible. And we believe as Christians that we meet together with saints from across space and time supernaturally. And so, especially with things like technology that we're communicating through right now, there is no reason that we can't do everything that we do on a Sunday morning through methods like this.
And your church has had to deal with the same restrictions. How have you navigated through the challenges it has brought? You say in your piece, we adapted because we wanted to continue connecting with people while also balancing the sanctity of human life.
Yeah. So first of all, let me just shout out, the Huffington Post picked this article up, but it was originally written for my local newspaper. So let me shout out the World Spectator, give them some free publicity. But we've changed a lot of what we've done. Things like children's ministries and youth ministries, there are restrictions now on what they can do, and there have been different restrictions on that. It's about getting creative, right? So we've used technology, we've invested monetarily in technology, and then we've also just gotten creative in how we connect and care for people from a distance. And I think that is something that the church, the global church, had to grapple with anyway. The world is so interconnected now that this has accelerated that. And I certainly am not indifferent to the difficulties that has presented to us. But by adapting and using technology and getting creative in how we discuss things with people or provide counseling remotely, there are pros and cons to that and challenges with that, but there's also some blessings that come with that and some things that we have found that people really respond to.
Stepping out of your comfort zone a little. You also say in the article, gathering in large numbers with little or no safety measures is not only irresponsible, but it also runs counter to everything Christians stand for. Explain that for me.
That's right. Well, you mentioned it a few minutes ago, sanctity of life. Christians are pretty uniform. It's pretty uniform across Christendom that sanctity of life is a biblical principle. It's one of the foundational tenets of our faith. And that is something that applies from womb to tomb. And we have to acknowledge that when it comes to preserving the sanctity of life, this is one of those times where that matters. Where the rubber meets the road. Are we willing to be people who say, even one preventable life lost is too many? And if so, what is our role in preventing that? And so in cases like this, I liken it to fire capacity. The government restricts churches and other venues in how many people can be in one confined space because of a potential risk. If there's not always a fire, but there could be. And when there is, the safe thing to do is to have restrictions on those numbers. And the same thing with COVID restrictions. They're limiting the numbers of people who can be in a certain space, not because there is a guaranteed risk, but because there is the potential for risk. And so one is very similar to the other. And if there's a potential that we could be helping preserve life, we have a biblical obligation to do so.
This has unfortunately become a very divisive issue. Pastors are being fined. One has even been jailed. Is there anything on the other side that you do agree with?
Plenty. One of the misconceptions since my article was published here locally and then published by HuffPost nationally, one of the misconceptions that I've had to deal with is that people are taking this as, with me writing that we should be abiding by these rules, as me saying I agree with every single one of them. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a politician. What I know is that the Bible calls us to obey the things that are being asked of us. And so there's plenty, when these conversations happen, the conversation always turns to, well, are these rules even effective? And I can't speak to that on a professional basis. So there's plenty that I would sympathize with and plenty that I would agree with about whether or not the rules are being applied consistently, but that's not for us to say. It's not my job to be questioning the government and what they're trying to do to keep us healthy unless it contravenes biblical teaching. And again, so far I don't see that.
All right. Pastor Jonathon Shierman, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.